Thank you so much for attending this particular presentation. And as Mark mentioned, I'm part of the ARC project that we do at Monash, supported by the Australian Research Council. When your face is your ID, public response to automated facial recognition. And these are the people on the same project. What this presentation is going to be about is a particular element in the project, which we talked about, the privacy concern around FRT as a culturally embedded practice in the Chinese context. So just a little bit kind of brief overview about Western privacy. For us, the privacy concern has mainly been conceptualized as information control or privacy as identity representation. And by examining how facial recognition has been discussed on Chinese social media platform Weibo, we show that facial recognition has been a trigger for heightened awareness for privacy as a culture value embedded in Chinese representation of identity through this particular culturally embedded face practice. So China, as you know, is leading the world in facial recognition technology. The country already has more than 400 million CCTV cameras installed, making China the world's largest monitoring system. What makes the Chinese surveillance technology particularly relevant and interesting is its governance by combining mass surveillance with population control, as we heard so much about in the last 2 days. This particular approach has always been at the heart of PRC's historical legitimacy. And we've heard several speakers talking about this issue as well in the last few days. But unlike other mass surveillance systems in the past, the emergent technologies have the tendency to rewrite our expectations of how to be social in public. In particular, what it means to reasonable expectation of privacy. So despite new debates within China over citizens' rights and privacy concern, FIT has allowed the government to develop greater capacity to justify state power with its promise to protect as well as control human life in the country. So our paper investigates key legal documents coming out of China concerning the deployment and regulation of FIT in China. On the one hand, we've seen that FIT plays a key role in the country's controversial social credit system. Cameras installed in Xinjiang, for example, where the Uyghur people congregate to allow police to track the movement of citizens, has caused major international criticism on human rights violation in China. But at the same time, it seems that the Chinese social organizations model does take on board the critiques deriving from the mosaic theory in the West. Some of the legal experiments around FIT in the country reflects the change of approach from social management towards social governance. The latter obviously acknowledge the role of public interest on this particular issue. I might go to the next one. FIT has already resulted in various legal cases around privacy in China. On 28th of October 2019, this Professor Guo Bing filed a lawsuit against the wildlife park in Hangzhou over the use of FIT as the only means of access. And this has been known as the first case of facial recognition in China. And the judge ruled that, obviously, as many of you know, the park needs to compensate Guobing for the loss of contract benefits and transportation costs. And the park must delete the facial features, including photos submitted by him when he applied for the annual permission card to enter the park. This case enlightened new rounds of public debates over privacy as basic human rights in the face of the rise of new surveillance technology in China. Importantly, there is a shared concern that these technologies deployed by government and private private corporations are changing the very nature of public life in China. Chinese public space has always been shaped by mass surveillance technologies, but the emerging tech, such as FIT, has the capacity to rewrite what it really means to remain anonymity. And this has created resistance, as we've seen in Chinese, circulating in Chinese media, such as this case. So take a step back. Surveillance technology mediated public life has become a normality around the world, but few studies engages with this particular issue as a localized cultural practice. I come across Liebold's work that talks about in the West, surveillance is a far more decentralized and market-driven process, whilst in China, by contrast, surveillance is top-down, party-initiated project. So our paper is focusing on this particular lack of attention towards local culture, towards the tech, around the tech. Of course, there are some aspects of Chinese concern of privacy in relation to FIT, which are universally shared. Identification that once carried out through complex social interaction in private space are now taken over by a centralized data system poised to deliver ubiquitous trackability of individuals, as Mark's work has been very important in that area. But the Chinese conceptualization of privacy varies in significant ways as a result of different expectations of privacy in public space. Here we focus on Chinese face behavior as a culturally sensitive practice which cuts across all aspects of universal privacy concerns relating to FIT. The mediated technology theory, which I come across also in the last few months, has become really useful, I think, in understanding the culturally embedded nature of new technologies. For example, individual rights are not treated as universal in AI-mediated public sphere. Instead, it is granted according to different contexts and individuals' capacity to opt in or out. So going back to Mark's point earlier about how to control the mass at the level of the individual, for us, this culture remediation of the tech has been largely ignored by many countries when they are actually deploying Chinese FIT technologies in very different social and cultural contexts. And so based on these theories, we approach FIT in particular concerns of privacy as a culturally embedded practice about the complex process of identity formation in the Chinese public place. We reference here, as you can see, the Hannah Arendt's mask theory as a foundation to understand modern identity as mediated, represented, and acknowledged by the public. I found this idea of mask particularly relevant in talking about FIT because according to Arendt's theory, mask is a technology that mediates the public persona, and the private self has been the most straightforward reading of her theory. And this particular theory suggests first that mask is a technology of barrier to prevent the private self from interfering into the private self from interfering the public persona and vice versa. So we play the political act aligning with our public persona by hiding behind the mask. Meanwhile, the mask allows us to choose who we want to be. So for Arendt, the individual subject cannot determine the outcome of identity formation alone. It's also shaped by how identity is perceived and acknowledged by the public. The uncertainty surrounding this process of identity formation is what makes her theory particularly relevant, because facial recognition technology displaces individual representation of public persona, as well as its connectivity and sociality. The disclosure of who we are in front of others has been purposefully controlled by centralized technology. As such, FIT reverses the identity construction in public space and has significant impact on the democratic condition of societies. Some argue that emerging surveillance technology displaces both the opportunity for individuals to individual representation of identity and the sociality of identity by censoring information collection, processing, and sorting. I also come across Lai Quangpan's work in Hong Kong, his observation of mask use by Hong Kong protests in 2019 opposing the extradition law amendments. There's some strong relevance to this debate. During the protest, he observed that initially people wear masks to protect against police excessive use of tear gas. Then the mask becomes symbolic of the social movement, which then values anonymity, protecting protesters from being identified by the many surveillance cameras around the city. To him, the use of masks is both a symbolic and pragmatic resistance towards the surveillance technology directed at the public. He argued that the key outcome of any disorganized social movement, like the mask movement, is to trigger the collective response among members who have a strong sense of individuality. The production of political subjects as both connected and autonomous is enabled by the boundary crossing capability of the tech, blurring the public and private space. So he argued that mask wearing makes possible the connectivity of identity as well as the politicization of the subject. It's possible for anyone to change the authority whilst wearing the mask, because the mutual beckoning among those who wear the same mask also encourage them to model one another, enabling them to develop inter-subject bonding. If mask wearing contribute to identity formation, then FIT takes that away because of its disposal of any possibility for representation and socialization through our face or technology of the face. Use Pan's words, FIT forces us to really speak only to the non-subject or the naked identity in public space. So according to a very rich literature on Chinese face practice, which I'm not going to any detail, it seems that the Chinese, to the Chinese, face is their most precious possession, and to give and maintain face is a tactic which most Chinese will be receptive to. So there are three kind of meanings attached to that: the face as the social power connection, the face as one's dignity, integrity, and also the mask face as a representation of one's identity. So the key issue here for us, for the Chinese use of FIT, is that they're based on the authoritarian control model, place the identity as a technical and legal construct against the idea of face as a social and cultural construct. The non-subject condition created by FIT is possible because it weakens the intricate relationship between face and its rich social and cultural value. So I'm going to just listing all these regulations that we come across in relation to Chinese regulation of facial recognition use in public in the last 2-3 years. Like the deployment of other mass surveillance system in China, the state and local government actually are very much responsible for the coordination and regulation of FIT. These emergent regulation redefines the reasonable expectation of privacy in relation to FIT. So I just want to highlight one of the things they said in the provision of the Supreme People's Courts on several issues concerning the application of law in the trial of civil cases involving the use of FIT. They said specifically that any freedom is not absolute freedom. Freedom is limited, and the exercise of personal freedom cannot harm the interest of other people. And the other thing is, despite the public's distrust towards private operators, the relevant industries are encouraged to self-discipline and are establishing industry standards with limited regard for privacy as a cultural value, when most of the regulation concerning FIT are in the form of guidelines with no legal status. So I won't go into that too much. I just want to say that this is the bit of rich data we've collected on Chinese Weibo, basically through the keyword search of facial recognition since 2020. And we're trying to categorize them under three categories based on privacy as a controlled mechanism for personal information, 隐私, and privacy as representation of personhood, 个性, and privacy as civil rights connecting to others in public, 人权. And so I just presented here some comments and all three of the categories we use to make sense of people's response to privacy concern. So just to give you example, comment 2 under privacy as a gateway to personal information. This person said, I don't against residential compound to install facial recognition, but I don't feel safe when my personal data is being processed by those illiterate security guards. I know that their system synchronizes with local police, but I just don't feel safe about how my personal data are collected. So in the view of many commentators, those companies behind the implementation of technology would not be interested in taking on any adequate responsibility to protect privacy. In the second commentary, in this commentary I just mentioned, we can trace a distrust towards non-government use of technology, which legitimize government's discourse around more centralized legal protection of individual privacy. However, a friction can be observed between the state's perception of privacy as about the liability of private companies carrying out these regulations on behalf of the state, and the public's perception or understanding of privacy as an individual liability in relation to FIT. So I won't go into all of those other comments because I'm running out of time. Just as a point of conclusion, I guess, we argue that Chinese people reinsert culture values to their mediated public appearance and are united in the cause for civil rights to make sense of the new mediated public space. And studying this particular tech offers us the opportunity to really explore culture remediation of surveillance of technology and as the basis to understand the changing nature of public space in Chinese society. Okay.
Thank you very much. We will move on to the next system, so that is the Haiyun Zhao.
Yes, I will go here. Welcome. You're ready? Yep.
Yeah. Let's share the screen.
Good.
Great. Can you see our slides, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Haiyun and I'm here with my co-author Tingting. We just joined from Guangzhou, China, which we are doing our field for the project Moving Data, Moving People. It's a project on the SCS and how it's working among the migrant workers and people in mobility in China. So our title of the paper today is Monash Coping Strategies Against the Digital Punishment of China's Social Credit System. Actually, it's an ethnographic work of what we have done around a case study of Monash in China. So the three basic research contexts is that, of course, the first one is the SCS launch in China. And with a very controversy and also hot debated mechanism, which is called as Liang he Chenjie, a joint reward and punishment mechanism. So you maybe have heard a lot of stories around that, for example, with a lot of punishments, not just on people's financial situations, but also on other social relations as well. So a lot of blacklisted people have been on this public punishment list. And then also we have heard a lot about how the Chinese state today has made this whole SCS punishments more digital or more smart, based on the ADM decision, the automated decision-making process. For example, they are trying to integrate the SAS with people's individual personal information, their bank accounts, and their phone numbers, and other social media accounts as well. And then the third research context is that actually there are a lot of different types of blacklisted based on the China's SAS blacklist. But one of the most famous or most popular reported part is those who have been called as debtors. They own a lot of debts to various kind of financial institutions, and therefore the lot of media reports have reported them negatively, which is called as naolai, a very, how to say, stigmatized term to describe them. So we can see a lot of stories. Okay. And here you can see that this is a picture actually just showing that also of these debtors picture, they have been publicized in a lot of public spaces with their names, with their ID numbers, with their home address, etc. Sometimes even with their phone numbers. And so here comes to our three main research questions. The first one is that how this SAS blacklisting program function, or actually maybe they're not functioning in China, especially towards this group of so-called naolai. And then how the individuals on the blacklist, namely this naolai, how they perceive and also respond to and also negotiate with their punishments. And the third part actually is about more specifically about the case we noticed that how the family members of this naolai or people around them, how they cope with the SAS blacklisting situation in a society when we find that the family unity and filial piety they played. So here comes to our research methods. Actually, you can find this is a very big family tree here. And we have a people here called as Ne, the third generation, and she is Ne. She's a master's student right now, and she's our gatekeeper, and so we know her family through her introduction, and this is a very big family with 44 people. They live in South China, Guangzhou province, and they have a very successful. They once had a very successful family business. So Ne's father, who is now 55, he was in charge of the whole family business. But because of the failure of this family investment, now the whole family business is right now just bankrupted. But these 44 family members are still sharing all the financial obligations and also the debts. So 8 of them have been blacklisted by the SAS, which means that they have been turned into so-called naolai. And so, the cases. Oh, of course, this is just one example of our presentation, but we also have interviewed other cases about the debtors, and we find it quite representative of this group of naolai as a family. So we find that they have 2 main types of punishments enacted. Of course, the first one is that being as a family, all those 8 people, once they have been blacklisted, they receive the financial restrictions, and which means that all their properties, including the houses they're living and also their cars and shops and bank accounts have been frozen, which automatically, and is as long as it's under the name, and also their WeChat Pay or Alipay has been automatically disabled. Actually, because China is now a cashless society, which means that it caused a huge amount of problem for them in the daily life. We expect, but we will know more about how they deal with it. And then the punishment system also consists of this big data platform. So this means that if anything under their name linked with our national ID or bank accounts, they will also be disabled. For example, they will have difficulties of buying the high-speed train or flight tickets, and also their names will be also publicized on the local public space, because the banks has sued them. And also, as we said, that they have restrictions on travel and also the job opportunities, because if any family members want to have a government job, then that could be a huge problem for them, and also their children's education, because in the local society, the private schools are much better than the public schools. So now most of the younger children, the younger generation, don't have that qualification to be admitted to the private schools again. So Tingting will tell you more about how they deal with those punishments.
Yeah, thanks, Haiyun. So as our fieldwork unfolded, both of us were on the ground. We went to the small town of Guangzhou to visit this whole family. And as our fieldwork unfolded, we find that there are several ways the family cope with this disaster of being blacklisted. Firstly, when 8 of the family members, their bank accounts, their social media are frozen, they would borrow other family members' bank accounts for daily use. And it's also a common strategy taken by our other participants. I mean, besides this family, they would borrow each other's phone numbers, ID number, and social media accounts to navigate around their daily life. Other than that, in the family, the trust breakers were carefully chosen. Let me get back to the family tree. Le's father here was the one who made the decision about who are going to be blacklisted. So he chose those who are not employed and also who are old in the family to be blacklisted, including his brothers and their wives, and 2 young men in the next generation to be blacklisted. That is a very calculated decision in the family. And also the family make a big argument that other people who are blacklisted, they get away because they do not live in the same town anymore. And they make this family, they make this argument that they chose to stay in the small town and they do not flee. And that is a very moral thing to do. That is another strategy to cope with the crisis. Okay, our last research findings point to the very interesting microdynamics inside the family. The power differentiations between generations and genders, as predicted in many literature in Chinese family studies, are clearly manifested in the ways in which sons of the senior generation, namely Le's father, uncle number 1 and number 3, made this decision of this risk investment. And everyone else in the family were not clearly aware of the amount of the debt and also how the debt came along. And also in the 3rd generation, they can only obey the decision the 2nd generation made. And also in the 2nd generation, all the wives, they have to sacrifice a lot to help with the financial crisis, especially in the case of uncle number 1. The first wife of uncle number 1, when she was still alive, she had given everything she had, including her maiden estate, to help pay the family debt. However, this does not stopped uncle number one from having an affair and cheated on his first wife and marrying a new wife after the first wife's death. As a matter of fact, this incident is a bigger instance, a bigger crisis, family crisis, rather than the financial crisis in the family. Also, for the case of Liang, because he had a fiance, the fiance raised the bride price after knowing the debt of the family, the huge debt of the family, because she wanted some security for the nuclear family. But more interestingly, in the third generation, there are several daughters in this family, and they have showcased the what we call the emergent femininity, which refers to how young Chinese women today they will expected a new normal mode of womanhood characterized by individualism, self-confidence, and a willingness to openly criticize their own family. That is very new in a patriarchal family system. And they chose, for instance, Sa and Le here, they chose to study and work far away from the Guangxi small city at the time of the investigation. For this small family unit, it's very interesting because they have 3 daughters, and the family wanted to have a son, and then they adopted a son Zhi here. And during our field work, the 3 daughters in the family will make jokes about this, and they will say, as the son, Zhi will inherit the debt of our family, so it's his problem. It's a joke they made. And also Le's mother and the 3 daughters of her, they established a WeChat group. In the WeChat group, Le's mother wanted to tell the daughters not to get married because men are costing and can make you lao lai. So I'm going to quickly conclude our research findings. Social credit systems in contemporary China has attracted many scholar attention, but our research, especially our ethnography research, has attempts to expand and strengthen this research by shedding light on how those being blacklisted actually responded to the crisis. Obviously, the strong family ties have led some of the wives, sons, and daughters to be innocently implicated in the debt chain. However, the family unit has, as a whole, has helped the family to go through the crisis and remain the harmony. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, so this is Zhou, a PhD student from University of Cambridge. Today, I'm here to present for me and my co-author, Professor Liang from Kushan University on our in-progress research, automated reduction, the practices and imaginaries of content moderation on Chinese short video platforms. So this is an ongoing project that studies content moderation on Chinese short video platforms from how it is framed and justified by the platforms to how it is perceived and understood by platform users. For now, we're in the middle of data collection stage, so we are only able to present some preliminary findings, and we are open and willing to receive any comments from you to improve our study. Okay. First of all, let me start with what we mean by content moderation. Roberts defined content moderation as the organized practice of screening users-generated content posted to internet sites, social media, and other online outlets. It is a governance mechanism that structures participation in a community to facilitate cooperation and prevent abuse, which justifies why platforms must, in some form or another, moderate, both to protect one user from another, or one group from its antagonists, and to remove the offensive, vile, or illegal, as well as to present their best face to new users, to their advertisers and partners, and to the public at large. Current literature on content moderation mainly focuses on two aspects: means and impact of content moderation. Existing mechanisms include both automatic moderation and manual moderation. The former involves algorithm-based automated filtering that identifies, removes, suspends, or shadow bans the content, while the latter is achieved by intensive manual labor, who go through flagged content and respond to user report in real time. Studies on impact of content moderation looks at how algorithmic visibility
You seem to be falling out. You seem to we lost you.
Justice and depoliticalization, as well as its impact on content production.
Haiyun, you were freezing for
Oh my God.
or something.
So, can you still see me?
We could see you, but we couldn't hear you for a minute or so.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Should I start with the last slide, or
Yeah,
do I
video.
keep going?
You should probably disable your video because and just show the slides.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my slides and can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you and we can see your slides, so that's good.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I go back by one slide, or do I start with this slide? Which?
I think this one is fine. Yeah.
Okay. China operates one of the most complicated content moderation mechanisms in the world. The State Council, together with Ministry of Information Industry, Cyberspace Administration of China, Ministry of Culture, and several other authorities, published and amended laws, regulations, provisions, and rules on what content ought to be censored and their respective measures for violations. The Chinese government delegate authority to platforms to regulate their own content. It is mandatory for them to comply with these rules and regulations. In most cases, platforms adjust and update their community guidelines based on these existing laws and flexibly respond to new regulations. Recent studies on content moderation rely heavily on US platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, while less work has been done to look into how digital platforms in non-Western societies, especially countries imposing strict censorship on media, conduct moderation on digital platforms. In addition to that, a large body of literature has been devoted to the study of political censorship and information control on text-based platforms in China. On the other hand, much less work has been done to investigate the practice of commercial content moderation on Chinese short video platforms. In recent years, short video platforms like Douyin or TikTok and Kuaishou have increasingly emerged as major channels for the production and dissemination of cultural products in China. These platforms have implemented a range of approaches to screen, filter, and remove user-generated content according to laws and regulations. How platforms implement content moderation and how users understand such moderation is thus of a big concern to the study of content moderation in general. To fill out the above mentioned gap, our research focused on the following aspects: how platforms introduce and explain content moderation, how content moderators practice content moderation, how users perceive and understand content moderation, and how did the study of non-Western platform contribute alternative perspectives to content moderation. That said, we raised two research questions focusing on both platform explanations and user narratives. First, how do Chinese short video platforms frame and explain the practice of content moderation? And second, how do Chinese platform users perceive and imagine the practice of content moderation? Inspired by Thomas McDonald's study of algorithmic lore videos and Sarah West's study of users' folk theory towards content moderation, we developed a twofold plan to study our intended research questions, which includes both content analysis and in-depth interviews. Our study gathers three groups of data to explore the two research questions. First, we collect content moderation policies and documentations released by the three video streaming platforms, including Douyin, Bilibili, and Kuaishou. These data help us understand how platforms themselves develop corresponding mechanisms and justify their exercise of content moderation. In the meantime, we also look into user-generated content to explore how content moderation is perceived and explained by average user. For instance, videos of them sharing their experience with content moderation, explaining their understandings of content moderation, and tips and strategies they develop to circumvent or cope with existing content moderation mechanisms. Similar to algorithmic experts' videos on YouTube, this content illustrates how users make sense of and react to content moderation. We also plan to conduct in-depth interviews with commercial moderators and platform users in the next couple of months. Here are our preliminary findings from this step. So our preliminary analysis reveals that content moderation on Chinese platforms have multiple layers and purposes. Content moderation is used by platforms and the state to remove online content that violates laws and regulations while promoting or discouraging particular social norms. I guess this might be a cliched saying, but this is what we find now. And meanwhile, platforms also adopt content moderation to share user behaviors and avoid information diffusion across platforms. According to the thematic coding of our content analysis, the following content are specifically identified as offensive and illegal content: content portraying unlawful behaviors, content disrupting social orders and threatening social stability, content posing threat to cybersecurity, obscene and pornographic content, and hate speech. Platforms often justify their moderation practices by showing that users need to follow state regulations and laws on platforms. For example, Bilibili provides a detailed list of illegal content such as terrorism, pornography, copyright infringement, and privacy breach. Content failed to comply with these rules are more likely to be removed immediately, and the uploader in charge are subject to punishments such as temporary or permanent account suspension. In addition, platforms also highlight the importance of promoting social norms when introducing content moderation in their policies and documents. Content promoting or discouraging particular social norms are rather vague and subject to interpretation. As such, content that hurts feelings of Chinese people, spreads positive energy, or encourages extravagant lifestyle will not receive recommendation from platforms and are subject to different levels of moderations. These two categories reflect the first purpose of platforms to conduct content moderation. That is, to fulfill the censorship and information control requirements of the government. The three platforms do not present any distinguishing variations in their political censorship, but they do show differences in moderation of content, promoting or discouraging social norms. The second approach suggests that platforms consider content moderation as a means to nudge users towards certain orientations and maintain their competitiveness in the platform ecosystem. Content violating the second approach will not always be removed or censored. Instead, the platforms will not recommend such content to other users. Through this form of moderation, platforms can encourage users to provide high-quality content. For instance, remixing and low-resolution videos are less likely to be recommended on Bilibili. This type of content is often regarded as junk videos by the platforms and the algorithms. And users who frequently post this kind of content will more likely to be removed. As such, platforms attempt to teach users how to understand the matrix of content moderation. And more importantly, they aim to legitimize and moralize their practices, framing content moderation as a rational system and encouraging users to discipline their content. Platforms often define content moderation as a means of quality control, but we also reveal that other purposes, such as monetizing content moderation, restricting access to other platforms, imposing user self-censorship, and reducing content visibility also exist. And furthermore, by analyzing user-generated content about moderation, we find that platform users show two types of understandings towards content moderation, through functional perspective and through relational perspective. The functional perspective assumes that moderation relies largely on automation, and thus users must improve their content. In comparison, the relational understanding develops folk theory to explain the transparency and shadow banning in content moderation. And for the next step, to cross-examine our findings, we also plan to conduct in-depth interviews with Platform X employees who used to implement content moderation, because this group of people has firsthand knowledge and expertise in monitoring and screening user-generated content based on their trainings and discretions. We are not interviewing current content moderators because they are generally, they have to comply with non-disclosure agreements. Our interviews with them will help us make a better grasp of the overall picture of content moderation on the platform's end. And to theorize from the user's end, we plan to conduct interviews with platform users to further explore their imaginaries and perceptions of content moderation. During this stage, we also intend to compare and contrast platform differences in their performance of content moderation from users' point of views. In the end, we will map state policies and regulations regarding platform governance to their actual applications to understand how official discourses make a role in this progress. And this concludes for my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the disruption and the unstable internet.
Yep, thank you very much. That was perfect. So I think we have very limited time for questions. So should we skip them or what? Yeah. So if there are any really pressing questions, I think especially for the online participants, because the rest of us can maybe talk during lunch. It's now. You have one. Yeah. So we have two questions.
Yeah, actually, I have a question for Haiyun Zhou, the last speaker.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. And during your presentation, I realized you mentioned a theory called imaginary or folk theory. I wonder how you, what do you mean this theory in your research? Can you explain more about imaginary?
Okay, so basically we're establishing this theory from other people's work. Let's see the person's name. Let me make sure I give credit to this person. So We read through a paper by Sarah West and his study of users' folk theory about content moderation. This person generally interviewed users about how they interpret and their imaginaries about content moderation. Basically, the users might not be clear about how the general mechanism works, but they do have some self-interpretations about what that is like. So this is what we mean by the imaginaries and folk theories. Basically, it is like a ground theory where we learn from the users about what they think of this algorithm and the content moderation.
Okay, then we have.
Thank you for 3 very interesting presentations. This is to Haiyun Zhao and Tingting. This is Mark Andreevich. I was just curious, it's more about the logistics of the family allocation of punishments. Could you say a little bit more how that works? That there was the option of deciding who it is who gets subjected to the punishments that are meted out by the system. And it sounded like within the family, they were able to pick and choose. How is that managed? I mean, are they presented, you have to have this many people be punished and then they get to choose within the family group who gets punished?
Well, I think we need to explain a little bit about how the people, they can get loans from banks. They need to sign contracts with the bank and with someone called Danbaoren, who is the sponsor for the contract. And then within the family, they have to choose who is going to sign the contract and who are going to sign as the sponsor. And within this context, the family, they made decisions about who signed the contract and then became the debtors, and then who are implicated because they sponsor the contract. Yeah.
And actually, we find it quite interesting that because most of the debts have been created about like several years ago when China's economy are much better than recent years. So because the family business are actually are around finance and real estate industry. So you can imagine that recent years, of course, they're not good at all. So when they decide who is going to sign the contract, it's quite interesting that some of the family members who have been chosen to sign the contract are actually, for example, maybe a university student who are not employed at that moment, but who, of course, according to the law, these university students are not qualified to sign this huge contract to have a loan from the banks, but the bank authors help them to do that. You know, maybe, for example, to fake the documents and then make this university student who were quite young at that time to become become sometimes a debtor, and then the family business just get bankrupted a few years later, and this young student now graduated, now want to have a job, and then now in trouble. So this is just one case of how the family in business who were quite good a few years ago, and now, of course, they have some kind of too optimistic about the Chinese economy, and now the real estate bubble in the Noto area just suddenly boomed. So it's a huge, actually, and what we can find from the Noto society, this is not just happening to this family, but a lot of their friends in the business circle who are also doing, like, for example, the private lending or the real estate industry, all their business friends are also working quite successful as a family unit before, but now most of these business family friends have also suffering this almost exactly the same experiences, like the family most of their family members have been blacklisted, and the children get affected by this blacklisting thing, and also all their bank accounts, especially the bank accounts to receive their retirement pensions, have been frozen, and their social insurance just suddenly disabled as well.
Okay, so we have Haiyun for fun.
Oh, I just have a very quick comment. I know we're running out of time for the next panel, it's bleeding too much into the next one. But just a quick comment on Xin's paper on the facial recognition technologies discourse in China, and that in relation to Mark's keynote on the friction. When you talk about the facial recognition technology discourse and how that has impacted on the Chinese notion of privacy, and the friction here appears because we are talking about middle-class intellectuals who are increasingly aware of the discourse on privacy, and they have been calling on restrictions or regulations of the industry. Well, they're encouraged to implement such policies. However, what happens in reality is a different story. On the other hand, you see lots of people would welcome facial recognition technologies, with some residents would firstly, when they move into a new place, they will buy facial recognition cameras in their hallways, in their homes, and they welcome this technology for security reasons. And they kind of, that's, as the keynote panel has discussed, when there's human involved, we are the frictions, and the frictions actually are quite big among the Chinese societies when we look at the facial recognition technologies in relation to rights, privacy, and security. So yeah, no time for you to respond, but we can talk about later. Thanks.